This is Sunil Gill interviewing Kingsley New on the 3rd of June 2018 at his home in Harbourne. Kingsley was born in Bamenda, Cameroon and moved to the UK in October 2010. Kingsley was born in 1979. Can you tell me a bit about your family history?
Yeah, well, I was born into a monogamous family. I was the third boy. I had two elder sisters and two elder brothers. I lost my two elder sisters, one in 2002, one in 2004. But I've got other brothers behind me, three of them. So in total, I have two elder brothers and three junior brothers. So plus myself, so we are six brothers now remaining. All my brothers are in Cameroon. My parents separated. My dad remarried. My mom never remarried. So I've got half brothers from my dad's side.
So did you say a monogram family?
No, monogamous family.
Monogam.
Yeah, that means my dad was just married to one woman at a time.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
What was it like growing up in Cameroon?
It was actually really fun. I've got really fond memories of my childhood until the time that my parents separated. It was absolutely fun. It was a very nice family setting, and all the time. I mean, particularly because we could childhood. I just remember the things we could do as children, that go out and play. At school, there were not many constraints growing up as a child. So I think growing up in Cameroon was, when I remember it, I just have fond memories up to the time that my parents separated.
What was the environment like there?
In terms of,
Can you just paint me a picture of how, if there were lots of trees or...
Yeah, well, when I say Bamenda is the main city. But I actually grew up in Ndop. Ndop is a smaller town in Gokotunjia division, and it's got hills, it's got plains, and it's a lot of greenery around. And we've got two seasons in Cameroon: the rainy and the dry season. So during the dry season, it's very dusty, and then during the rainy season it can be very muddy. So during the dry season everything just dries off, and but during the season is green. It's it's nice. And then we've got little hills here and there. So, and then there's some like a little mountain, Tengokotunje Hill, and sometimes we go up those hills to harvest wild fruits and things like that. So there was a lot to do in growing up.
What was your school experience like there? Primary school experience?
Well, primary school, I do remember a lot because I went to primary school at the age of three and a half. At that time, I followed someone who was going to register, and then ended up being registered myself. And from that time, it was really interesting. It was something I loved. I went to a Catholic primary school anyway. So, just the one thing that I don't like about it was that we were being, the flogging, because we were flogged whenever. If you came late, you were flogged. If you didn't do something right, you were flogged. And then I didn't like also the manual work. It was so hectic. I remember at a young age we had to bring machetes, and we had to cut our school field. I may not like it now, but I think it actually somehow formed my character in a way, because I believe myself to be a hardworking person. I do a lot of stuff now, like my garden. I tend to do them myself. I do a lot of things around myself, and maybe all of that started from being introduced to that at an early age in primary school. Then moving on to secondary school, the school experience itself was good. I was from the first year I was the school prefect, the class prefect of my class. And moving on to that, but then things started going downhill because it was within that period that my parents separated. It's hindsight that tells me now that I really was affected by it, but I didn't realize at the time that I was affected by it. Almost everyone in my family really was affected by that. But well, I could say I'm lucky because I somehow, after a while, just bounced back from the situation and moved on. Well, thanks to my mom, who remained like the foundation and the rock. I could always look to her and see a reason to continue to do the things that I've ended up doing. So basically, secondary school, but Cameroon secondary school is divided into two sections. The first 5 years, we'll call it secondary school, and then the next 2 years is high school. So during the first 5 years, it's general education, do a lot of science and arts combined. A lot of things to study. When you're getting to the end, so the last 2 years, you can narrow down to either the pure sciences or the pure arts. I was straddled in between. I didn't really narrow down to any because I took things like biology, chemistry, and then I took some like history and geography. I combined all of that. And so when we go to high school, you get the O levels at that stage. And then when you go to high school, there are 2 years. You now really narrow down to some specifics, where I actually narrowed down to economics, history, and geography. Then I added religious knowledge. So I did 4 subjects for the advanced levels.
What was your interest outside of school?
Well, in high school, I wouldn't remember much in secondary school, but in high school, I was a member of what we call the press club. The press club, we basically were responsible for entertainment in the school. So we did a lot of stuff like local news around campus. If you were caught in an unfortunate situation, then press club was going to report it during like the assembly the next day. So it was very fun, especially when people had to come around begging us not to report something about them. So we were like the media, and we were snooping around whenever there was something. If there was a fight, if there was things that there were things that we knew that were newsworthy. Well, newsworthy doesn't really mean it's interesting. It only means that sometimes there was dirt on someone, and it was interesting, one, because it made people, we were like the watchdog, and secondly because of the threats. Sometimes the adrenaline you get when someone is threatening you that don't report, and you have to do it because you can't be partial. That was one aspect of press club. We also did organized like press nights, where it involved comedy, dancing, music, and things like that. And then I was the education prefect also, so I tended to organize a lot of stuff around education and within the school, ensure that students did their prep work. So that for me was the highlight of my high school period, because I was involved in a lot of stuff. I mean, I didn't follow up on all of them, but I could do a lot of stand-up comedy at the time. But I don't know, I just didn't follow up on that. And I remember we actually had young people that were, because it was more like a talent show. When I look at Britain's Got Talent and all this, I'm like, oh, we did those things in those days. We got students to come and showcase their talents. We came up with all these creative things to make get students to get involved in things outside of the education. So basically those were my things that I do. Then I used to play a bit of football and basketball, but not much basketball because we didn't have the courts then. There are that many basketball courts and the balls. So
did you carry on the press club outside of high school?
When I went on to that's probably now getting onto Nigeria, because when I left high school, I went to Nigeria. I went to Nigeria into the seminary. It's where Catholic priests are trained. So I was in Nigeria as a missionary. It wasn't really as press club, but whenever we had something like a football match, there I would come back, and in the evening while we're having dinner, we're over about 150 of us. I would run a commentary of what happened, and sometimes when we have occasions, I would come up with the comedy. I would, just do some entertainment. So basically, it was just a one-man show. I didn't really integrate it into the like a club. It wasn't like a club in that setting.
What age were you when you moved to Nigeria?
I was between 20 and 21. Yeah, because what happened is, this is an element that, what happened is when I finished secondary school, I started high school, but that was the time that I really got hit by, because there was these huge disagreements between my parents at the time, and I just became very rebellious, and I left school for 3 years. I left school. I did a lot of different things. Went to stay with an uncle. Went to stay with my sisters. I started running a business. And then one day, I just met my mom and I said, I want to go back to school. I want to go back to high school because I want to go to the seminary. And for me to go to the seminary, I need to do that. She said, well, if you're ready to go, then I'm ready to support you. So that was how I sort of bounced back from that situation, and I've never looked back since then. So that's why there might be a gap, because I actually should have finished high school in 1997, but I ended up finishing high school in 2002, and that was the same year I went to Nigeria. So I was between 2021 at the time I went to Nigeria.
What did you study in Nigeria?
As a missionary student, I did a lot of stuff. First of all, I was studying to become a priest, so there was the religious aspect of it. But at the same time, I had to do 2 degrees. One was with the University of Port Harcourt, where I had to do philosophy, but this time I was more focused on political philosophy, more like political science, sort of. And then I was also matriculated with the Urban University in Rome, through distance learning, but the lecturers were there. It wasn't online. We had lecturers there, the teachers and everything, but then the exams were set from Rome, and every assessment was done from there, and the final results was and certificate was given from there. So we had to do these 2 concurrently. So I finished with a Bachelor of Arts from the University of Port Harcourt, and then a Bachelor of Philosophy, a BPhil from the Urban University Rome. So it was 4 years, very intensive. And this at the same time during holidays, I had to go to different places to preach, to carry out evangelical work, and get work for maybe at least 2 months within a parish setting. Yeah, so it was 4 years, very, very busy 4 years. But the way it's structured is I didn't go straight into the degree program. There were some preliminary years where what they call the postulancy that I did from 2002 to 2003, and then I did what they call the novitiate from 2003 to 2004. And the novitiate program at that time, we are completely cut off from the world. We live in a very isolated part of Nigeria. It's an area where there is very little communication with, in terms of road networks. It's in the middle belt of Nigeria, and we integrated with the villagers. We had, I remember all the clothes I had. I didn't use them because we had a particular designed dresses that we wear so that the villagers recognize us when we come in there. And it was one of the most surreal and the most satisfying periods of my. I had nothing of my own, but we lived in a community where everything we did, we shared together. We were up 23 of us there, and I didn't talk to anybody. My family, I didn't communicate with my family. I didn't communicate with anyone outside of that community for that year. And every weekend we had to go down the villages, talk to the people. Many of them we had to use interpreters because they don't understand English. Bring things like basic healthcare, studies, those basic things of life. Just go around those places, and that was how I spent 13 months in that place. And after that, in 2004, I now came back to Owerri, where I matriculated with the University of Port Harcourt and the Urbanian University. So that's why, in total, it was 7 years that I spent in Nigeria.
What's your most memorable experience or moment?
I can't nail it down to one. It was, like I said, there was a lot of stuff that I did. But I think the 1 year in Utonkon in the Middle Belt was really memorable because, in a world where there's a lot of consumerism, people strive too much after material things. Families break down because of material things. Marriages, today you hear the whole strife, everything is about wealth and this and all that. I found out that living in a way where everyone, I mean, I just met, out of the 23 people, I just met them. It was just one person that I had known before. We came from Cameroon together. But we lived as a community. We cultivated some of our food. I was what they call the farm manager. I raised the chickens. I did broilers from day-old chicks to this. We had goats. So we could produce our own food. We had cooks anyway. Then there were some days that the cooks had to go off, so we cooked for ourselves, and then we did all the prayers. We cut the compound. We did everything there, but the happiness that I found, because it was like, I mean, it was so surreal, because you're cut off from these things. TV, you watch TV once in a while where maybe you have important football games or all that, because we had to put on the generator to get light, electricity. So it's not, TV wasn't something, and then we had to go to bed at certain times. I think lights out when the generator comes on. Someone is responsible for that, so they have to put it off. It doesn't run through the night, so someone has to put it off. I won't remember exactly, but I think probably some days it will be 8 p.m., some days it will be 9 or 10. And once that's out, everyone is in their room, and so I think we had rechargeable lanterns at the time where you can use if you were reading and things like that. But beyond that, all silence, and we sleep, and then the next morning another day starts. We're up early, 5 a.m. by 6 or 6:30 we are in the chapel. We pray. We had a very structured program, very structured. It was very memorable, because that's something that I've never done again, and something that I still wonder how I went through, and something I would, if I had the opportunity to just take time off from all this hustle and bustle of life and go back to, I would probably do again.
After graduating from there, how did you adapt to living in without those constraints and such?
Oh well, I mean, it was a choice. So I didn't see it as constraints. It was just something that you just loved. It's just like, because if there was no one really policing us around, but you just found out that you wanted to do things that in that structured manner. It's a community. You had to do things together and things like that. But when I left from there and I got to Owerri, it was a similar structure. It's just that we now were in a town where you could go out. We had days we go out. We were in that compound. We don't go out until maybe Wednesdays. We'll go out on Wednesdays, and we go to town. And then, because there was no internet in there, we had to go to town to use the internet cafes. So that was the time I think I created my first email in 2002, email address in 2002. So by 2004, the only communication means then was sending emails to people. So I do go back sometimes now to my email, my Yahoo box, to look at those communications we had. You send an email, you come the next week. If the person hasn't responded, you really feel disappointed. You come the next week again to check if they have responded. And that was the basic means of communication. It was, so it was not really hard to adapt as such. I think it was a year or two later that I had my first phone, and it was so expensive to operate. So basically, you don't really just call people anyhow. But it wasn't hard to adapt, because the transition was not huge.
Can you tell me about your journey from Nigeria to the UK then?
Yes, I didn't just come directly from. I never came directly from Nigeria to the UK. When I left Nigeria, when I left the seminary, I went to Port Harcourt, and I worked there for a year. I worked in a company, ES Rock Nigeria Limited. It's a construction company, and I was working in the office with the general manager. I was some sort of like a personal assistant, and I managed some accounts and payroll and stuff like that. So I worked there for 1 year, and then left back to Cameroon. And when I went back to Cameroon, I spent some time at the Diocese of Boya. Then I was still thinking that I'll probably go back, because at that time I was still trying to discern, do I continue to become a Catholic priest, or do I, go on to something else? I don't really think I had, in my mind at that time, I really thought I was not going to continue. I just thought I needed some time out to be sure that it's exactly what I wanted to do. And so I spent time in Boya, and I was doing some part-time teaching, philosophy to students of an institute of theology, and then I got involved in the local church there, and I was just, and then I saw that a master's program had been launched at the University of Boya. I applied for it. The application process was very, very difficult. You had to spend a lot of money to apply for a local university, and I applied to do a master's in political science. So what happened was, a few months after the application, I got a friend came and told me that she'd seen a list of those who had been offered places had come out. So, I went down there to ask how I could enroll. And by the time I got there, it was a complete different list. So I was querying how did the list change? They said, well, this list is the vice chancellor's list. The other list, unfortunately, is gone. And that was a shock to me because I had 2 bachelor degrees. I thought I was very qualified to do a master's, and all of a sudden I didn't have a place in a university that was not ranked as high as the ones I had just done my undergraduate from. And at that time, it was a lot of things happened out of coincidence, because a friend called me from Nigeria and asked me to help him check how he could transfer his the course he was doing, to the University of Manchester. So I went on the computer, on the internet. I'd gone then to do some crash course in computer just to keep myself busy. So one of the reasons I did that was to have access to the internet, because I had unlimited access to the internet whenever I was there. So I went there and I was trying to check how he could transfer to Manchester. And that's when I discovered I could apply for a master's online to Manchester. So while I checked and sent him the information, I now decided to apply. Because when I left Nigeria, I got my references. They were written out and stamped and given to me then. So what I did was I just did and scanned all my certificates and uploaded them to Manchester University. And within 3 days, I got an unconditional offer. That was surprising. Like, it came to me like I've just applied to a local university I just got one from Manchester University. So what it was in February, and I started checking out scholarships. Can I get a scholarship? I was looking around, all the scholarships for Manchester were gone. So I decided now to start checking other universities that had open scholarships, to apply to them at the same time and apply. So that's when I went on to apply to Liverpool Hope University, to Coventry University. Coventry University gave me a scholarship which was about £1,000. Then Westminster University also had a lot of scholarships open at the time. I applied there. And then University of Birmingham. So I didn't get any of the scholarships from all the other universities. I got 1,000 from Coventry, but then University of Birmingham, I got a bursary worth 50% of my tuition. So my tuition was about 11,800, but I was to pay 5,900. So 5,900 went to the bursary. So that was what I'm just answering already, going forward to how I came to choose Birmingham. I never had really known much about Birmingham. It was just because I had that offer and I had 50% off my tuition that I now had to make a decision. And also now, at that time, I started looking at the university league tables. I got interested in looking at those tables. A friend from Nigeria actually told me to check that. I checked and I saw that out of all of them, Birmingham actually ranked the highest of all the universities. So it became an easy choice for me. So that was how I prepared and came to Birmingham.
How did you feel about moving to the UK then?
Well, it was a bit difficult. One, because I was a very cautious person. Yes, I was a very cautious person in terms of just taking huge leaps like that. So what really made it easier was that I had a friend, Eugene, who used to live in Birmingham. I just remembered that he used to live in Birmingham. So I called him and asked him, would you be able to pick me up from the airport when I arrived? He said yes. So that made it easier. It was really, really stressful period, going through the visa application, which I did myself. and everything, and just followed it online. I think it was much straightforward. You had the documents, you had everything, you send it through. It seems a bit really complicated now. But I just did everything. I didn't go through any agencies, and then I waited. And then when I got, it took a while. When I got the visa, it was just, I think, a week, or I think my school was about to start, so I had to prepare to travel. It got really stressful until I think I had some injury to my facial nerves, maybe because I wasn't sleeping too well or all that. But what it was like, it was this compressed. I had to prepare within a week and travel, and I was coming 1 week later than other students. I think my course started on the 4th of October, but I went to the university for the first time on the 11th of October. So all that was really, really, really hard. But I just had to do it and come.
What belongings did you bring with you?
Very little. Because one thing is, because I was thinking, I'm not sure where I'm going, so I should travel as light as possible. I had a luggage allowance for, I think, 46 kg, but I had less than 18 to 20, just about 18 to 20 kg. I had just one box, and basically I had clothes and a few chewables and stuff like that. Any other thing I didn't want to, and then my certificates and the documents. Basically, that was it. I didn't carry much. No. So when I got here, that was when I started now trying to get the things that I needed, like warm clothes and all that.
What age was you
when I came to I just turned 30. Yeah, just 30. Yeah.
What were your initial thoughts of Birmingham?
Well, it was a very confusing situation first, because when I came, the friend who picked me, he actually is in the military and he was in Germany. So he did not tell me that he was not in the UK, because he knew that might put me off. So what he did was he drove from Germany. He booked a training here in the UK, drove from Germany down to the airport, and then picked me up, took me to Wolverhampton, and then we went to a house where there were some other students, and then he now took me upstairs and said, okay, I'm going for a training tonight. I actually came from Germany. I'm like, oh, why did you say? Well, I knew if I told you this, you might be pulling. I know you're going to do it. So you're here. I've asked these guys that you can stay for a week while you sort out your accommodation and stuff, and then you can do it. There's one guy here who goes from Wolverhampton to Birmingham, so he will take you tomorrow to show you how to get to the university. And that guy just took me that day, went on the train. So I was commuting from Wolverhampton to the University of Birmingham for the whole of that week through the train. I was using just the train. I didn't know about the buses. And that was a lot of money that I spent. When by the time the week elapsed, I'd actually started talking to students in my university, and I met two students from Bangladesh who were staying in Aston. So it was a 3-bedroom house, so I took one room from them, and I stayed there for 3 months. Then now looks for a place in Newtown, and then subsequently to this. But because I came in the autumn, getting into winter, and that year 2010, I remember it was one of the years we had a lot of snow. But my first impression was, especially in Aston, places getting just dark and dreary. I felt like I was in a Harry Potter movie. That was all what I could think about. It was like, places just get dark at 4 p.m. and I just couldn't. It took a lot of time to adjust, and then that was the first time too I saw snow. So many things that were happening, but I think I just hit the ground running, because when I just came, I think I just remember vaguely within the next couple of months, I think maybe November, I was actually already campaigning for international students officer. I didn't win. I came the runner up, but it was for me something that showed me that it was a challenging thing. I didn't know anyone. I didn't have a campaign team like other students had. I was a one-man team, but I just did it because I said, you know what, if anyone can do it, I could do it. So it was a lot happening, but it was also fun because I mean I was in a good university. I was studying and doing what I had to do.
How did you spend your time in Birmingham outside of the university?
Nothing much. As a student, I had the right to work, but it was hard to get work. Hard to get work, one, because I don't know where to apply. Secondly, because even looking for work as a cleaner, they'll tell you that you were supposed to have 6 months experience and 6 months UK experience. So I'm like, if I don't work, how do I get the experience? I mean, I need to work, and it was so difficult. So I actually got the first work in February. So I came in October and I worked for the first time in February. And so you can see that basically it was either university or I go back to Aston. And that was it. Not much social life. I started knowing a few people in the university. We could hang out at the gun barrel. I think gun barrels it used to be on Bristol Road there, and sometimes in Selly Oak. But other than that, there wasn't anything much to do outside of university and back to my room in Aston.
Are there any notable differences between Birmingham and other places you've lived?
Yeah, well, I mean, of course, there's a huge difference between Birmingham and some of the towns, say in Cameroon or Nigeria. Of course, the train, for example, we don't have that. The transportation networks and things like that. What I did notice, which is a bit strange, was that I did not feel as safe in Aston as I felt in Nigeria. This is weird because in Nigeria there is this sense of insecurity, but I felt secure. But in the UK, where there was a sense of security, I felt insecure. And I think that was in part because I saw that despite all the talk about security, CCTVs and all that, when I got to the UK, I found like when I was going back from university, I'll see like this group of young people with hoodies standing around. I really felt like I felt so afraid. And because I could read in the news about stabbings and about things like that, I was never really feeling that secure. But in Nigeria, I knew that if someone were to attack you, it was either they want to steal your phone, they want to steal something from you. No one just attacks you for nothing. So I think that was the huge difference for me in terms of how I felt. I never really felt that secure in my skin because I knew that there were issues here where I could simply be attacked for just walking down the street. The person is not interested in anything. So I think that was, one difference. But in terms of infrastructure, I mean, there are places in Nigeria which you would say that, I mean, in terms of development, they are similar as Birmingham. There are places in Port Harcourt which are the same, but then you also see like when you start going to Aston, you see also run down, decayed, dirty places. There's those similarities, but I mean the amount of poverty that you could experience on the streets here was not similar to what you experience in Nigeria. So there were all those differences that I could make out.
Where were you living after Aston?
I went to live in this, again, a 3-bedroom house, shared house with some 2 ladies from Tanzania. So I lived there for I think 8 months until I went to India, because I went to study to work in India for 3 months. Then when I came back, I lived in Edgbaston. When I came back from India, that was in September 2011. I now lived in Edgbaston, and from Edgbaston I moved down to Quinton and then to this place. I've been here for over 4 years, the same house. So.
What were the circumstances for you to work in India? What did you
It
work?
was a research fellowship, the Avanta International Fellowship. I applied for that, and because it was offered with it was paid, and they paid my flights and accommodation throughout the period. So it was something good, and it was very competitive. So I applied out of many students across the world, and I was the one person was lucky to get it. They were looking for two, but somehow the other person didn't come, so I was the only research fellow that year. So I was based at the Aspen Institute in India. It's now called the Ananta Institute, and it was a very, very enriching experience. Well, that is another place where I can actually compare, because it was surprising when I got to India to see how infrastructurally developed India was. I didn't know before going there that they had an underground, and that there were places in India that, I mean, I somehow loved India, many parts of India that I stayed in and I went to, than Birmingham. And then there were places like Chanyakya, if I'm pronouncing it, in New Delhi, that are cleaner and greener than any part of Birmingham I've ever seen. Those places are just out. It's like you could see them jumping out. So there was this huge dichotomy. Well, of course, in India, you see the dichotomy, the huge dichotomy between the rich and the poor. And the one thing I noticed particularly was the fact that I had grown to know only about the 400 million poor people of India without knowing that there were 700 million rich people. So, you know, and that when I went there, I saw now that, I mean, I went to even the Apollo hospital. I mean, I don't think there's any hospital here that I've seen that is that good. Even the way they book appointments. I went with a friend who came to visit while I was there, and booking appointments, going there to see the doctor. You know the profile of who you're seeing. It was so organized, and strangely enough, I saw a lot of British people coming there for healthcare. Well, maybe the rich ones. So these are things that I was just watching and experiencing. I now thought, you know, so for me, India was a learning curve, because I saw that what I learned in school, in university, I did international political economy and development, and everything that was mentioned about India was about the poor, but no one talks about the vast riches, the history. Going to the Taj Mahal, for example, the richness of the history. No one tells you anything about that when studying. So I just thought it was, for me, a huge learning curve. Going there, yeah.
After your research program in India, coming back to the UK, what did you do?
I left India to Cameroon and I spent 3 weeks in Cameroon doing a brief research, and then came back to the UK, completed my master's, because I had to suspend the master's briefly. I took permission from the university to suspend it briefly, go to India, came back, completed it. So when I completed, my schoolmates, my course mates graduated in December 2011, but I graduated in July 2012. So by that time, I'd applied for the post-study work visa, and that at the same 2012, I started working with the Seed Foundation. It's a charity that is involved in community development, particularly with education of young people with learning disabilities, and outreach with women, empowerment, and many other things. So I worked with them for that period of time, from 2012 till 2014, and then I became member of the board of trustees. At that same time, to 2012, I got involved with Fab Afrique magazine. Also, I subsequently became the editor-in-chief of the magazine. So when I came into it, I just came and became very busy.
I'm just going to pause this now. So, what were the circumstances that led you to become the editor at Fab Afrique?
Well, I started working there as with Fab Afrique. I edited some articles, then I contributed some articles to them, and I was doing that part time while working with Seed Foundation. And then at one point, I was asked if I could join the editorial team. So I did. I became part of the editorial team, helping out with content and things like that, and events. Fab Afrique was organizing a lot of events, catwalk events, business events where they did networking and things like that for African businesses here in the UK and in Birmingham in particular. doing fashion shows in different places. The Water Hall, there, the Malmaison hotel at the mailbox, and the Grosvenor Casino, in different places. So just helping young businesses in Birmingham to like grow and showcase what they do. And then whenever those things were done, they were now transposed into the magazine, which was a quarterly, every 4 months. And well, one day I just got an email from the CEO saying, Kingsley, you've been doing an amazing job. Are you happy to become the editor-in-chief? I was surprised. I've been editor in a magazine before when I was in Nigeria, actually, but that was very academic, so it wasn't as multi-content as Faberfreak. Faberfreak was this lifestyle. It dealt with a lot of different issues. So, but then I had an amazing team. When I started working there, I had an amazing team. There were so many people with a lot of experience who helped. So it was much easier than I anticipated. So.
Was you still working for the Seed Foundation at the time?
Yes, but this time only as a trustee. Yeah, I was a trustee of Seed Foundation. Now it was an unpaid role, so getting involved in helping whenever I could, but not on a paid basis anymore.
How long were you working for Faberfreak for?
Well, I started, I became like editor-in-chief in the end of 2013. And I started building up, like the profile, and one of the first things that I did was, as editor, was to look at the market strategy and say, well, we could operate partly from the UK, but it should move to Africa because it's about Africa, and so. We moved the head office actually at the end of, just shortly after I became an editor, we moved the head office to Cameroon, Douala, where it actually is now. And we had these meetings lined up in Kenya, in Ghana, Nigeria, South Africa, where we wanted to like have sub offices because we had this business model where we wanted the magazine to really spread, and we had a lot of interest from these places I've named, which covered a lot of the other continents. But unfortunately for me, and somehow for the magazine, because the CEO relied a lot on me, I couldn't travel in 2014 when things just started going downhill, and most of that didn't materialize. Talk about it as well.
What happened in 2014 that made you unable to travel?
In 2014, I lost my passport. So I applied to the Cameroon High Commission here in the UK for a new passport. And for some reason, they refused to give me a passport. And I couldn't travel. I had a visa to be in the UK. I had a resident permit that was valid, and but then I didn't have a passport, and I couldn't travel to any of the countries I had to travel to. So basically, I was stuck. So what I did at the time was, my basic knowledge was to call the Home Office. Because I didn't know, but then I was getting information. It was political issues in Cameroon. In 2014, they were not as clear to me or anyone else as they are now, because everything really spiraled out of control in 2016. But I never, from my history, you've seen I've never really spent a lot of time in Cameroon. But when I left, partly because of the experience I had from the application to the University of Boya, which I didn't get, I started becoming a bit interested in Cameroon politics, and then I started writing on my blog. On my blog, I was very critical from a political perspective, very critical of the government. Just writing a blog, but I didn't know that doing that was something that you don't just do in Cameroon anyhow. And when I went there in September, after I left India, I went there to do the interviews. I was doing my research on the role of religion in Cameroon politics and looking at regional inequality. So I went to the north of Cameroon, where I chose a local government area which I focused on. And because I interviewed a lot of government people, interviewed the Lamido, interviewed church leaders, the late bishop from there, I interviewed a lot of people. That raised a lot of concern. Now, what went to Yaoundé was that there was this journalist around asking a lot of uncomfortable questions. But I was just doing it for academic purposes, but I didn't know that it was creating a lot of discontent there. So when I was to leave Cameroon that day, the 25th, 25th of September, that was in the morning, I was stopped at the airport, and they kept me for 3 hours. They were asking about that interview. They were trying to get me to give them. So I basically bluffed my way out of there, and because it was late at night. I think the people who stopped me didn't have the authority to just hold me without a warrant. So that was how I left. But I didn't know that thing was still festering. So when I applied for a passport and they went there, they held it. They didn't. So that was how my trouble started. And it was in the course of chasing the passport now back with someone in Cameroon that I got to know that was the situation. And the Home Office actually promised that they were going to do something, and they never did. Which hindsight now, I now see that it's the worst situation I could have put myself in. I shouldn't have actually gone to them, because I've dealt with the Home Office for many years, and it's as confused as maybe they should have named it confused.com, because it is really a bunch of confusion. Nothing is done properly, no regard for their own rules. They make the rules and they don't regard them. They tell you things, they don't keep to it. And worst of all, asking the Home Office placed me, when my visa finally ran out, it placed me as a political asylum seeker. But it was a process that I finally found that everything about me was a lie. Even things that happened in the UK, I had to prove them beyond reasonable doubt. So the Home Office just branded me like a liar in everything. Even I'm sure if they could deny my name, they would have. But it was just like a roller coaster from there on. And things, I was still holding on to Faberfree because I was still allowed to work, but I couldn't do most of the things that I planned to do. I did probably do a publication after that where it was looking at women in technology, and it actually won an award from Cambridge. One of the articles in it, the one that the interview, we got published in a Cambridge publication for teaching interactive English to secondary schools. So but at that time I was struggling with all these, trying to understand the system. I didn't have a lawyer, and things just spiraled out of control. By 2015 May, the Home Office came to this house and they arrested me like a criminal and took me to detention, where I spent 3 months. And that was when, for the first time, I got good lawyers who actually got me out from detention. And it's still been just like the roller coaster where I win. Whenever I win, the Home Office comes back and takes us back to that same position. It's like they have this disregard for the law courts. In 2014, a judge made a lot of errors. I would say it categorically, because if I sit before him, I can give him all the documents and evidences that I gave him and he ignored. One clear example is the fact that the judge in his ruling said an event I went to in London on the 7th of May, where the Cameroonian Prime Minister was present and some government ministers. The judge concluded that I didn't attend that event. Whereas the email invitation that I got from the Developing Markets Association came to me as the editor of Faberfree at the time. It was there as evidence that I was invited. The train ticket, I went with Virgin Train. The train ticket was there as evidence. The badge that I was given was there as evidence. The judge said that could have been printed off the internet. There was a picture that I took, and posted on Facebook. I said, first selfie of the day, inside Church Hall in Westminster. It was there as evidence, but still all of that, the judge concluded. how he arrived at this conclusion that I haven't proven that I was actually there, that it's like I made that up. And so that just shows you how biased it could be, or I don't know if it's biased or whatever. But if I couldn't prove that I attended an event which surely I attended with so much evidence, how much difficult it is for someone who probably was fleeing from war or fleeing from persecution or anything, how much difficult it can be for them to prove something. So I mean, but what has happened is, because that judge made such a negative determination, for reasons I can't fathom till today, the Home Office has hung on to that till today. And subsequently, I've been to the upper tribunal twice, won the right to bring a judicial review. But each time, once I win, the Home Office will contact my lawyers and say, oh, let's settle out of court. And, of course, every time the best advice is, go settle it. If the other person wants you to settle, no need wasting the court's time. But each time we've pulled out from the court and waited on the Home Office, what the Home Office has done is just repeat the decision that they made before we went to the judicial review, quoting that same judge. They'll quote things that the judge said. For example, the judge said that your friend in Cameroon does not exist. But subsequently, my lawyers have been in touch with him directly. He's sent them copies of his passport. He's taken pictures of himself in Cameroon with newspapers showing the date and everything. He's communicated with the lawyers. My lawyers are very, very British as any British person. So it's not like there are people that I could convince to do it. So, but it is evidence still. It's looked at separately, and what that judge. So it keeps being what that judge said in 2014. And I recently wrote an email to the Minister for Immigration, Caroline Noakes, and which I copied the new Home Secretary and 2 other MPs. And what I was asking there is, what exactly is your process? I mean, is it, and I had to ask them, is it because when that judge made that determination, I was considered a low-hanging fruit? Because I've won twice. 2 other upper tribunal judges have considered the case and said, we think there's merit in this, but you still go back to that judge. So it's like, whatever the situation, what that judge made, which is full of holes and lies, is my reality, and I must accept that reality. So that's why it's been like, for the last 4 years, why I'm going through all this is because my whole life for the last 4 years has just been that. It's just been this long stretch of this, everything, my career has crumbled. I can't chase up anything anymore. I've basically just been in limbo for the last 4 years.
How has that affected your identity? How do you see yourself now as living in the UK? Do you feel comfortable here?
Well, I mean, I've made a lot of friends. I've integrated a lot in the society. I've met people, him, like Aaron and others. When I became a member of Movement for Justice, and then I became a member of Black Lives Matter. I've been involved in a lot of community campaigning. I've been campaigning against the injustices of immigration detention as I experienced it, working with a lot of other asylum seekers, especially people who are more vulnerable than I was. And I have cases, for example, someone who was a victim of torture from the DRC, who was in detention, and because he had difficulties in communicating in English, for some reason they kept him there, which is illegal. He shouldn't have been detained in the first place. I'm the one who worked now with his lawyer to actually explain to the lawyer exactly what was the situation, do the translations and do that. And he was removed from detention. So, some of those injustices and all that, those are the things that I've been involved in doing. And, it's a difficult mix for me because, well, I love Birmingham. Obviously, that's why I'm still here. I've not moved to any other place. I love Birmingham because of the diversity, the multicultural nature of Birmingham, and the people I've met, the friends I've made around Birmingham. But I have very mixed feelings because it's it's the one place where I came with all these hopes of building a huge career, and then it's the one place now that has actually brought things to like a halt. Well, may I just add that from January, I actually started doing law at the University of Law. I was doing the GDL, the law conversion. You know, that was well, I had to like practically twist the Home Office's arm to allow me to study, because they were refusing that I couldn't study since I've done it tier 4. I had to put that on hold just last month. I've put that on hold because I've got some other issues that I want to sort out before I continue. So that was the only thing again that gave me some sense of self-worth. I was back doing something. I had another focus again that I was taking. But beyond that, everything has just been a blur. And I only had a sense of fulfillment when I was involved in activism.
What are the differences between when you first came to Birmingham and now?
Yeah, I think the marked difference is, well, Birmingham is very stratified. I now know where I can live and feel safe. Like I said, I didn't feel a lot safe in Aston. And now looking at, I worked as a census officer in 2011, and I happened to cover that area. Around Peribar, all those areas, I was the one who covered those areas during the census, and that was the time that I got to see a lot of how run down the area was. Many houses were dilapidated, and when I moved to Edgbaston to the side to Christchurch Close, I now saw that it was like a different side of Birmingham, and that's why probably I'm stuck to this side. I feel much more safer. Sometimes I see a semblance of my childhood with the children on my street here, because at least I see them play on the street. That's something we used to do, but I don't think I ever saw children playing on the streets in Aston. And I think it's not really common. And I really sometimes I feel sorry for children who grow up in modern day UK, because I just think their childhood is probably snuffed out of them. You know, Christmas comes, they get all these amazing presents, and the next child next door doesn't even know. It's only the people who got it for them that see it. But with us, when it was Christmas, we had new clothes, we had toys. You come out, you play, you exchange your toys. You had water guns, you had all these things that you could, you know. So but when I see sometimes during summer, I see the kids out here either on my window, I just say, well, this is what childhood should be. It's not about gadgets and computers. They are out on the streets actually playing. So I think when you see that as an adult, you can see we know, of course, I'm sitting there, I'm also watching them, as well as their parents can be watching. So somehow we know that our street is safe, where no one can come in there and this. But that just gives you that semblance of normality, where, you know, if children are safe out on the street, then I'm also safe if I come out on the street. And, you know, so I think it's just, and then secondly, I've grown to understand somehow the dynamics of society. It doesn't, I just understand also, if you really don't have any issues with some of the young people, maybe, because I've thought back about it and said, the media just made it look like it was that stereotype where you think a young man in a hood is dangerous, but they didn't do anything to me. So basically, I've just thought, you know what, if I am to be in that situation again, maybe I'll treat it differently. Well, I'm not so much of a nightlife person, so I'm not really out in the night and stuff like that. But basically, I just think I'm lot more safer, because I know the environment and I understand where I can be and where I cannot be.
Great.